Welcome, everybody, to our second part of our emotional processing sacred self-healing workshop here on this Saturday afternoon. Thank you all for coming. It's been a quite word-intense first part for this workshop that tries to capture the complexity of how we process our emotions and how this can affect our life and our behavior and our social experiences. In our life experience, I cannot even begin to tell you how important it is to be aware of these things. Now, this is a bit academic. This is about really learning the mechanisms, and you will maybe only take sort of 10% of all discovered material for your own sort of observation, for your self-awareness and the way you manage yourself. This is not important. This is the kind of workshop that you do, and that's why I produce these recordings, that every time you listen to it, you learn something new. Okay, and because we're not sort of in some kind of school curriculum or whatever, I cannot stretch this out into a 6 month, like one semester teaching. I have to sort of squeeze this all in here within these few hours that we give ourselves, and that's why I put the emphasis on the recording so that you can repeat this, you can listen to this and have your own thoughts in your own time. I hope that you have all either been in the first part or listened to the first part, simply because there'll be things that I will not cover again. I'm kind of glad I covered sort of some of the fundamentals of this terminology, and also, you know, the process of how we get to the parts here that really apply to ourselves. And we also spend quite a bit of time on sharing, which I hope we will be able to continue here today. Now, did any one of you actually do the recommended self-assessment tests? Emotional vocabulary, emotional intelligence. Did anybody do them? I sent them in the email with the recording. Okay, some of you did. Would you mind sharing just briefly, sort of, if those are not tests that I have or quizzes that I have designed, those are tests that are either sort of for study purposes or for staffing. That's usually where these personality tests are popular. Anything that you've learned from them, emotional vocabulary, about your emotional vocabulary or your emotional intelligence. Because I need to say, I found it rather hard. I came out of these tests with like, whoa, I guess I have to really pay more attention. Yes, Sri, I agree with you. The facial expressions. So one of the tests was about, you know, reading people's emotions by looking at their facial expressions. And I disagree with some of their interpretations. As you know, we teach people to read other people's energies through their facial expression, and the pictures, although that they did match this quite well, but some of the pictures did not match up with the energy of it, so that was a bit misleading for me. But it was really tough. Yes, and Julianne, you found out that you actually have a limited vocabulary. This is good to hear from me as a non-native English speaker, because there were some words that I didn't know either. They were simply words that I had never heard before in the English language. So it's good to have this kind of, you know, feedback here. Okay, so obviously this is a self-assessment. This is not about knowing the right answers or passing a test or anything. It's really just like, okay, you know, am I actually good at this? And we'll go a little deeper here today in investigating the factors that play into this, what allows us, you know, to have this emotional intelligence, to develop this. And I want you to come out here with a clear sense of sort of what you want to improve on for yourself. Obviously, a lot of the things that I bring in here are models they are theories or things that are taught this way. Okay, they're ideals, and we all know that there's so many curveballs that life throws at us, and that we all come to this place of higher levels of knowing ourselves and dealing with our life from different perspectives, from different we all have different paths, and so there is no one way, guys. That's really important to remember. I want to come back to a statement that I made at the very beginning, and I said emotional processing is not the same as processing emotions. And we talked a lot about processing emotions last time, sort of, sort of the basic vocabulary words and how our emotional literacy plays into this, what emotional regulation is, and so forth. And I said that emotional processing is, and actually here you can see this on your screen, describes the mechanics of how we process our emotions in order to resolve emotional stress and overwhelming emotions. Processing emotions is the actual process. So this is like what we experience when we process our emotions, and what happens if we don't process them all the way. And nobody processes their emotions 100%, just so you know. And that is basically, what we want to learn here, like really, how can we do this better if we try to put this together in some kind of statistical sort of manner, is that the mechanics of emotional processing consist of these 7 hallmarks here: the awareness level, and thus the ability to discern what it actually is that we are experiencing, the distinction between sensations, physical reactions, thoughts about the emotions, and context. We talked about this last time. Then the ability to feel and sort out our feelings. It's you remember when I asked, do we cry because we're sad, or are we sad because we're crying? That is sort of the inner reflection about what it actually is that we are feeling. So to feel our feelings, we can't heal what we cannot feel, right? And part of these mechanics is really the ability to just feel our feelings and recognize what we're feeling. So this is where the emotional literacy comes in, to also be able to label that, to say that I'm hungry, to say that I'm angry, I mean, or that I'm sad, and to be able to somehow communicate this to myself. I can't heal what I can't feel, right? Next is the ability to know how we handle our emotions, that behavior that follows certain emotions. And then, and this is often underestimated, being in touch with our needs. Why is this so important in conjunction with our emotions? Because some of our emotions are not actual true emotions. They're actually physiological states. Take, for example, tiredness. I'm sure you guys know what it's like to be really tired, maybe less patient, kind of short-fused, and a little bit edgy. Worse even when we're hungry. Low blood sugar levels can lead to a person being what psychologists often call hangry, or wearing a hat, hungry and tired. So some of our needs can determine our emotions via our physiology, our nervous system, as well as our hormones and our neurotransmitters. So that's important to understand that about ourselves, so that we are not so overwhelmed or doubting ourselves all the time. To know that when you are hungry or sleepy, that you're not in your full emotional capacity. We are aware that we're not in our full physical capacity when we are hungry and tired, but most people don't realize that it's also impacting their emotional processing. And then, of course, also the ability to express our needs. So, something like, hey, it's not good for me to have this conversation right now. I need to go to the bathroom, or I need to eat something first. These are simple things, and yet we often actually don't do that, because we're in that moment not really able to express it, or we are not prioritizing meeting our own needs. So meeting our needs has to do with the mechanics of our emotional processing, as well as obviously knowing and communicating our boundaries as well. So there are, very complex rules of that when it comes to, how we feel and how we express our feelings, how we act along with what we feel, and how we interact with other people. And we're going to go a little deeper into this here today, because that is where most of our emotional stress, okay, where that occurs. So ideal emotional processing, we covered a little bit of this last time, is becoming aware of our emotions, acknowledging and really feeling into what we're feeling, expressing it, owning it, forgiving it. Like say you were hangry, a few minutes ago, and you eat a little bit and drink something and you feel better now. You can say, okay, I'm sorry, that I was in a good state. Let's start this over again, or giving the same sort of leeway to other people as well, forgiving them if they were in a real sort of stressful situation, allowing emotional release that would be pertaining our own emotions, to not judge ourselves if we really need an emotional release, and also forgiving others for sometimes needing emotional release, without really judging that. Integrating, implementing in real life, not just thinking about our emotions, really making an effort of applying, this emotional intelligence, if you will, and using it to resolve things, to de-escalate things, instead of, say, to manipulate or play games with others. And then ultimately, it always also includes a good portion of self-compassion, to really understand that we are human and that we have these rich emotions, and that it is sometimes, whatever the triggers are, whatever the conditions are, difficult for us to process our emotions. So let's talk a little bit about emotional stress here, and I would love to hear from you guys what it is that you in your own personal life and in your own level of awareness have already identified for yourself what's stressing you. Last time we mentioned, we talked a little bit about how emotional stress can actually stress us more than, say, physical stress maybe, or mental stress. Who of you has had experiences that are clearly showing you where, sort of your, like, let's just call it, I don't mean it this way, but let's just call it weak spots are, where you can get hit really hard and it will take you a while, days, sometimes weeks, sometimes even months to get past something, where you get really sort of stuck in a very stressful emotional place. Does anybody want to share? Okay, she's sharing that mostly when you get negative feedback, or when you perceive it as negative. You mean from other people, right? When you feel something maybe like rejection, or them being critical towards you, or maybe even judgmental. Is that what you mean, Tree? So that when you feel some kind of,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, taking things personally, I guess. And, I just had my mid-year review a couple days ago. So,
oh, okay, at work.
At work, yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to, I can feel how there's almost anticipation, like, oh my God, something negative's going to come in and someone's going to say something's wrong with me. So, and that's anxiety inducing. And it's not just that, also generally, as you said, yeah, anything that's perceived as rejection or, yeah.
I mean, the anticipation of that, Shri, I would say that this is probably already a sign of trauma, because it means that you have already had experiences like that took you a long time to get over,
Yeah.
you know, where the processing of that was hard for you. So there's obviously different degrees of trauma, but you know, if we go, say, into a physiological response with this, I mean, it's normal to be a little bit, yeah, excited or a bit anxious, you know, when we have to go to an assessment with our superiors, or it's similar to like testing, you know, in school. You know, we've been put on the spot, right? But
Yeah.
that's normal. Everybody has that. But if there is something that you can already notice, you know, is like sort of happening weeks ahead of time, right? And takes you another couple of weeks, say, to get past, right? Then this is a little more. This is not just a little bit of emotional stress. This is indicates high levels of emotional stress. Okay.
Yeah.
Just the fact that you can acknowledge that. Now, you said something really important here. You said it gives you the feeling that something is wrong with you. Who can relate to that? Let's give Shri a little bit of support here, you know, because unfortunately the software only allows me to talk to one of you at the time, right? So over half of the people here can relate to what you just said, Shri. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is statistically significant here. Those are all self-healing people who are interested in healing this. So, but it's at least 50%, okay, of people here that can relate and sympathize with what you're saying. But I do want you to keep this in the back of your mind. Yes, and a lot of people are commenting with very beautiful comments to you. Okay, how they can relate to that. So thank you guys for being so empathetic here. This is really important. But I want to take this one phrase, Shri, not as your personal fear. Okay, I want to take that phrase, namely that you said that it makes me feel like there's something wrong with me. And I want to carry this here through this training a bit, this workshop a bit. Yeah, so don't take that personal either. That is just a really good way of putting it all together, like really why there is so much stress, because it means that we're doubting ourselves, right? We're doubting ourselves in who we are, and that's understandable. And this is something just for you here as a coaching tip, and everybody who suffers from this. When we get criticized, or when our behavior, let's say at work, is simple, right? At work, you're doing a job and you have a job description and you're being assessed based on your fulfillment of that, right? Based on your behavior, on your skills, on your performance. It's a performance thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is a criticism, positive or negative. Let's not forget that even the positive criticism is an assessment of our doing, of our showing up, of our performing. Yeah. And feeling that there's something wrong with us indicates that the way you perceive this is though as if you're being criticized in your being, as a person, as a self, as you know, somebody who is in a certain way. And this is something, a distinction here that many of us have to learn in adulthood, which is kind of sad, because it'd be great if we had parents who trained this with us from childhood on, namely help us to differentiate between criticizing, you know, criticizing your behavior or criticizing you as a person. And you can see, I don't know how this translates in other languages. I know in those languages that I speak, it's very similar. Parents will say things to their kids such as good girl, good boy, you know, and in a negative way, they'll say things, oh, you're such a bad, blah, 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 you know, like this labeling that points at being and not at behavior. So the ideal parental guidance here would be to say, I really don't like how you acted. I really don't like your behavior. I really don't like what you said, instead of generalizing, and making it a matter of, the child as a person. That is where this confusion is already implemented. I just want you to, this is a sort of a tip for you when somebody criticizes you.
Yeah, I can see how this pervades though through my life. I mean, in other places, like even, relationship breakups, it just becomes so like, yeah.
Well, most people are not trained in this. I mean, most people will literally, and they will have similar confusions. They will confuse, being and doing. They will confuse behavior with identity. Okay. And then they will say things, even though they may not mean it. They will say things as like, you always you always like this mean person, or you always like blah, 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 where we criticize the person as being and not so much in their acting. So as opposed to really differentiating and saying, I really don't like the behavior in which you show up, but I love your being. Do you know what I mean? This one extra step to see the difference between who a person is and how a person shows up, right? Because there's a huge difference. Okay. And when I criticize you, say, as my relationship partner, and this would be the same when I talk to my children, or, like friends or whatever, and there was some kind of conflict there, I find it part of my integrity to differentiate between the way a person shows up and who this person is, because I don't want to criticize you as a person. I want to criticize, if anything, maybe the behavior or the words, that you did or that you said, or you know what I mean, right? That made me feel in a certain way.
Would
So
you
that
say then, sorry, would you say then emotional processing precedes? Because
emotional processing helps us to differentiate this.
yeah, okay.
When you become more aware of this, and especially this part that I just mentioned to you, then you are able in a conversation online to process things. And you can, now when it's with superiors, obviously, they should have the training and the integrity to really point out that this is just behavioral, that this has to do with the performance, with the doing, and not with the being. All right. Do you know what I mean? Where a good leader will never criticize a an employee or a coworker in their being. Will only give constructive criticism for their doing. Okay. If people show up with this undifferentiated communication where they label you as a person, and they hit you basically at your identity level, then they have very low emotional intelligence. So emotional processing and conscious emotional processing helps you to differentiate that in all levels of communication, also in others. You can see when others cannot differentiate that, and then you can interject. For instance, you can say in a conversation, let me double check here, let me clarify this. Sounds a bit mental, but in relationships, I think this is a very important thing here for us to realize that when we interact with other people, and especially people that are close to our heart, where this emotional stress can get a grip on us, even more so, where we can get triggered even stronger, than with other people, that we always investigate of what is being said here, and what is actually the meaning, that we don't run into premature conclusions and assumptions, that we always clarify, that we go back and say, wait a minute, I'm not sure I'm understanding this right, what you just said. Did you mean me as a person, or did you mean my behavior? We can do that now in a job situation tree. Quite frankly, that is a bit of a given, because you have the superiors, and they have the right to criticize you in your performance. That is basically their job. Okay. But we should always be conscientious in the sense of that we don't take this as a criticism as a person.
Yeah.
You know, when your performance is being criticized, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that can mean many things, anything from misunderstandings, you know, maybe you're not clear about the job description, maybe, you know, you're just not motivated. There can be many. A good leader will ask you questions instead of criticizing you. A good leader will pick up on that and will say, Sri, there are things here that are just not adding up. You know, you're very skilled, you're very talented, you're very, you know, all these kind of things. But your performance doesn't reflect that. So I'm wondering what it is, you know, maybe your needs are not met, maybe your boundaries are violated, maybe, you know, those kind of things. A good leader will approach you this way. If you cannot get this in the job that you are, because I'll tell you the truth, you know, 80% of leaders aren't trained and aren't good leaders. Okay. Then it's a matter of, you know, maybe changing the job or changing, sometimes even changing the whole business, you know, because certain types of businesses also promote certain types of personalities. Yeah,
Yeah.
but the main point here is that distinction between acting and being. And we need to remember that when we get hit really hard emotionally, that which one it was, and clarify if needed, especially with breakups, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for your vulnerability, Sri. This is a big point. Many of us have that. Yes, Denise is commenting here, especially when the boundaries get crossed. Yes, but look, this is, you know, when I said 80% is probably more like 90%, are either not trained, don't have the integrity, don't have the emotional intelligence, or simply don't have the interest in heeding those needs of their employees. That's why sometimes this depends really on the kind of business, the kind of job that we do, because there are some industries that are known, you know, sort of for high level pressure, performance pressure, and so forth, where it's not very person oriented and where they simply don't care, where it's all just performance based. And some jobs are known for crossing people's boundaries, where, you know, we'd be in an illusion if we, you know, get hired for. Let me just, the first thing that comes to my mind is waiting, you know, working as a server in restaurants or customer service. Okay. If you get hired as a customer service person for the complaint department of something, right, a phone company or whatever, and you are not seeing that that is a job where you will be subject to emotional venting, to people releasing their emotions, their frustrations onto you, where they will attack you personally, and all other kinds of inappropriate, will show up with inappropriate boundaries, then you're an illusion about the job. Yeah. So sometimes we have to evaluate the kind of job that we're doing, because some come with this not because people are mean, but because people are humans too, and they have emotions too. And some jobs are sort of these jobs where there's very high levels of emotional stress, and some jobs are very person-centered. They can be very fulfilling and very, you know, just really sort of constructive for us. And some jobs are so performance-oriented that they produce emotional stress because they sort of cut out emotions altogether. So you see, it's a bit sort of about finding the middle ground here. Becky is sharing, feeling and experiencing grief can feel stressful. Yes, I agree with you. And it makes us almost like, yeah, it makes you not functioning as usual, like into your usual capacity. And so I notice at times I can resist it. You know, grieving is a whole different section in counseling and therapy, because obviously it depends on what caused, you know, or what the reason for our grieving is. But take, for instance, the one that is most socially accepted, which is the mourning. Okay, when you lose a loved one, when somebody passes, you know, this is socially accepted and even legally accepted as a state in which, you know, you're not in your full emotional, physical, and even mental capacity. And what does this require when we recognize that we are grieving? It requires us to be compassionate with ourselves and give ourselves the space to do that. You know, maybe take off a few days from work, or, you know, ask for more space. That is, you know, what comes with our human condition. That is what we all need to contend with. We have situations, okay, where we cannot function in our normal capacity, and we just need to be real about this with ourselves and others. I think the biggest problem that occurs is that we try to pretend everything is fine. Okay, so that is giving ourselves the space to grieve. You know, but there are so many conditions, like health conditions, or divorce, or like loss of a loved one, that can lead to prolonged times of grieving. Okay, and in child psychology, this is, you know, in educational psychology, it's a huge topic, because, you know, teachers, for example, they have to deal with kids going through grieving without knowing that it is grieving. Okay, and they have to meet their needs, and all that is very complex, yeah, in our societies. You know, how to address that. It starts though with the compassion that we have for ourselves. Yeah. Amanda's sharing, I can handle words, but being ignored makes me feel that there's something wrong with me. Very cool comment, Amanda.
Yeah, and it's not just being purposefully ignored, but any kind of passive aggressiveness
Mm-hmm.
that
Yes.
even, you know, so flat out being ignored for long periods of time, um, or having, you know, passive aggressive words that are meant to mean something else but don't. And it makes me feel I get into this fundamental, there's something wrong with who I am.
Right. So again, here the conclusion that it is your being that is being attacked, or somehow
Mhm.
addressed. It's a covert, you know. So what you're talking about is passive aggressiveness, and sort of like game playing, right? It's a form of emotional manipulation.
Mhm.
Actually indicates trauma. Okay, do you know what I mean? Because it immediately, I mean, you know, instead of seeing for what it is, right, that you're being ignored and that the other person is playing some kind of game, okay, and going in and say, well, you can play this game for as long as you want to. It's not going to change anything until we talk about it. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? That
That's
would
why
be
I, yeah,
sorry.
and I like words. See, I would love some, you know, whether it's good feedback, bad feedback, confrontation or not. I like to do that more than I like to have this emotional, passive aggressive,
Hmm.
let's pretend. That's what gets me um, into that
Into the
beingness.
stress
Okay.
level, and also
Yeah.
the higher, the elevated emotional stress.
Hmm.
Typically, Amanda, I mean, I just gave you one hint. One hint is that there's probably already trauma related,
Hmm.
sort of trauma present, namely the fact that you immediately go into this doubting yourself and feeling that there's something wrong with you. Uh, but the other thing is also that it shows you a lack of emotional intelligence, or even also a lack of emotional processing of the other person. Because there is a flip side to this. Not everybody grew up, you know, we talked about this last time, being free in expressing their emotions. So a lot of people, the majority of people, I would say, have actually become really good at repressing their emotions. In other words, they have a lot of stuff that they don't show, don't say, don't want somebody else to see, including ourselves. Okay, and that creates, between the two or more people, that creates dynamics. So now we are at like human interaction, right? And how You having an emotion and not talking about it or not expressing it can induce or trigger something in the other person. This could be you or this could be them. There's a two-way street, right? And how that then triggers something in them, and how that then triggers, and how that then sort of creates patterns, domino effects between two people, and ultimately relationship patterns. That's an important thing to realize, okay, that it's never just one-sided, it's two-sided. But the integrity level of that, namely what's the motivation, that still needs to be determined. That's subject to clarification. That would be something how we can maybe investigate the quality of our relationships. Because if I'm with someone who, let's just exaggerate here or generalize, never expresses their emotions, and always kind of leaves me in the dark and always makes me feel like there's something wrong with me and never gives me an opportunity to express or to resolve, okay, then we have a relationship problem. A relationship problem that leads to us not being able to fully emotionally process what is going on, and which then requires other measures, because one of the issues that I see, and this is all increased with empaths, okay, we'll talk about this here in a minute, namely because there's a lot of emotional projection and energetic projection and absorption taking place with these kind of relationship patterns, because they're very toxic. Okay, so that's a bad situation. Okay, whether you take this personal or not, it just is a bad condition for you to emotionally process. So in that way, we then also need to look at our family constellation, the way we grew up. We've already illuminated that a little bit, how that affects each and every one of us, and then in our relationships, how these things then play out on a day-to-day level. And as parents, we can also observe how these things then duplicate. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like this isn't just one person. This is when you have multiple people involved, then something that begins to cultivate in a relationship or in a family. And it's very important to pay attention to this. These things need to be addressed at the core. For the fact that we experience this high emotional stress and feel a little stunned or go into emotional coping with that, that's our problem, and that needs to be resolved for us, but the fact that we have this condition, that needs to be addressed as well.
And can you give like practical tips for not the relationship thing, but when I go into that high emotional stress over that particular topic, it really starts to eat me alive, like on the inside. Like, and I know this is trauma. I'm not like under,
complex trauma is sort of the ever repeating same trauma over and over again, right? So if you can tell already by the way I formulate this, if this is a part of our family pattern or our relationship pattern, and we live like this for like decades, okay, we also miss out on the opportunity to learn different ways. So everything we talk about here, Amanda, leads to more effective ways of processing your own emotions and resolving relationship patterns. And there is no one simple answer to that, because it grips deep into our emotional processing. That we always start at our own processing. We have to start with ourselves. I can tell you just as much as I could say 80% of people, like in work situations, aren't trained or aren't interested. As there, I can also tell you that in relationships, the way we perceive what other people do or how they react is also to 80 up to 80% false. Okay, so we assume things, and the only way to resolve this, after we started with ourselves, increase our own emotional literacy, observe our own patterns and so forth, become willing to let all that go, then we can go into a relationship and say, hang on, wait a minute. I'm seeing something I didn't see before, and I need to clarify this. Yeah, so the relationship part, that is when any kind of incomplete or, inappropriate or deficient emotional processing magnifies. It always has to start with ourselves. Because, and this is in couple counseling and couple therapy, problem number one, that these things multiply, okay? And that you cannot really judge, by how he perceives it, she perceives it, who is right. There is no right and wrong. If both have, sort of on average 80% false perception of what is going on and don't have the skills to clarify that, well, that's then when we need a professional, to help us with that, to come together and sort these things, to make the individual aware of all these different things. We get to this, here, like what these pillars are of that, but it's really everything that we are talking about here, and it starts with the awareness making, with us becoming aware of it within ourselves. Thank you for sharing, Amanda. She is also commenting, I've actually started seeing how not showing what I feel has led to results which I simply did not want. Yeah, and that's normal. This is really all this maturity that we talked about last time. We have to learn this, that if we don't process right, if we don't express right, we're just multiplying problems. Because in interaction with others and in our internal and external communication, all these things show. Yes, Denise, yeah. And you can see it very clearly in family constellations and family dynamics. It's very clear. I mean, there's no, invite me to your dinner and I can tell you guys everything about every person involved. Okay, this is all I need. A family dinner, and I can see all patterns. Okay, so the awareness making of that. Okay, so it starts here with identifying things such as what leads to higher levels of emotional stress in me, and this is good that you guys voiced this, and then really sort of identifying which part of our emotional inner confliction is the part that applies most to me. You kind of set priorities here. You see the list. Not being in touch with one's own emotions and feeling disconnected, not too disconnected to actually feel the true feelings, judging, feeling rejection, resistance of one's own emotion, the inability to properly express emotions, deflection or projection of one's unwanted emotions onto others, beliefs or expectations, how one should be or should not feel. So this is like sort of the super ego kind of voice in us, the hypervigilance or fear or anxiousness, as you described it, Tree, of a confrontation or of consequences, not knowing one's own needs and improper boundaries. What I would suggest to you guys is that you take this list here and maybe highlight one or two, best one, to start with, that you make a priority for yourself to work with. But these are the most common causes for sort of prolonged emotional confliction. So let's look at some of the parts here that we've already talked about and how they play into this emotional trauma. How trauma can influence the way we process our emotions, and this is so important, guys, to be aware of this. Okay, signs of trauma, not just like in that sort of PTSD sense, but also in sort of complex trauma. Okay, here you don't have to read all this. I'm going to give you the slide in with the recording, and many of you already know this one. I produced a explainer video where it goes through this. You see these 20 signs of unresolved or stored trauma is huge. Okay, what this can do to us, and also here the psychosomatics of trauma. Okay, what this can lead to in our 3D life. And I want to go through this. We've recorded many workshops here about trauma. I just want to pinpoint, where you can get more info here, even within the transCODES Sacred Self-Healing community. So these videos are all available for you, okay? Just understand that, repeated or excessive emotional processing, where you go through the same emotion over and over again, be it the anxiousness that she described, or the frustration or self-doubt that Amanda described, or some of the other examples that we had here. Okay, if this comes over and over and over again, that means there's a pattern, okay? And it's typically a sign of trauma if you can't ever resolve it. Incomplete processing, which includes mentalizing, constantly thinking about what is going on, what I said, what I didn't say, why did I say this, what did he say, what did he mean? I bet that meant blah, blah, blah. This constant mentalizing and sort of disconnecting from emotions by intellectualizing it, by sort of talking in this sort of clinical way about your emotions. Okay, that is also a sign of trauma. Hypervigilance, being hypersensitive and expecting the world to deliver, to heed your sensitivities and have a sense of entitlement with that everybody should, respect your feelings, but at the same time, you lack the ability to do this for others. Flashbacks, guys, emotional flashbacks is a huge indicator for trauma, for stored trauma. When you go into an almost hardwired emotional memory of something, somebody says something, and you have an immediate physical reaction or sort of a mental process that says something like that puts you into this place of expecting something to happen next. Who can relate to that? To flashbacks? Who of you here in this round has experienced or frequently experiences emotional flashbacks, where without further reflection, your body, your mind, your emotions, everything goes directly into the past. It's the past. Okay, this is more than half of you guys that has experienced this, or that is experiencing this, guys. You need to understand what it is. So this is part of the objective of these workshops, to give you vocabulary, okay? Because when we can name it, okay, then we can better process it. So you now know that going into a flashback, which means that you recall a memory, be it a physical, emotional, or mental, and all of those together, often completely undifferentiated, that is called flashback. And that indicates the mechanics of your personal emotional processing. Namely, that you cannot, as a healthy person would do, see something, experience something, feel something within yourself, then process it and say to yourself, oh, okay, that makes me really angry. Oh, that I don't like that. I'm having a certain reaction to this, right? And then sort of perhaps maybe even recognizing it, that it reminds me of something. Okay, but you're still in control of that. You can still sort of see all that. In a person with trauma, the emotional processing goes the other way around. The flashback comes first, and then comes the interpretation. And the interpretation then is, well, you've guessed it, 8 out of 10 times false. Because you are now stuck in your flashback. You're reliving the past. This is a huge insight here in regards to emotional processing and what is actually going wrong in the most relationships. To be honest with you, obviously, depending on some other aspects as well, the amount of projection, the ability of the partner to see through that, and so forth. But most relationships really just bounce, the people just bounce off their own flashbacks. Yes, it comes with a physical response. This is for those of us who have experienced some kind of physical intimidation, or even verbal abuse, like you've already identified, is something that makes you question yourself in your core, in your identity. This can come with immediate physical, emotional, and mental flashbacks. So that, remember that, guys. You know, chronic psychosomatic symptoms, obviously that is sort of the ongoing thing, and then sort of developing, you know, ulcers, developing Mr. diseases, fibromyalgia, MS. There's a very interesting study right now in MS patients and how their emotional processing actually related to the development of an MS. Wonderful science that is emerging now, you know, looking into the more holistic aspects of that. Disconnection, general disconnection of body, mind, and spirit. This is what many of you have discovered in the course of this sacred self-healing process, you know, your own self-healing journey, that there are massive sort of disconnections in some areas that you were completely unaware of because it kind of flew under your radar. You know, it was kind of like a blind spot. Okay, this is, you know, what trauma can do to us. And increased levels of energetic absorption and projection. I'm going to go into this here in a few, you know, minutes. I just want to ask you guys, oops, let me just see this. Do you identify out of these 7 sort of, I just picked the 7 most, there's a different list called ACEs. I've produced a video about this, 2 adverse childhood experiences and how that affects a person's emotional processing and physiological, you know, their life expectancy, really. That's usually 10, but out of these 7 here that I picked, who of you identifies 3 or more of these symptoms of unprocessed trauma? At least 3. Yeah. Wow, guys, you guys are, this is like 80% of you. So that would, I mean, this is not scientific now, my statement here. I just want to give you sort of a feel for this. This indicates that you have more than normal trauma stored. Okay. Yeah. So just to give you that feedback here. So energetic stress that relates to the emotional stress then, you know, indicates sort of a base level, you know, as a base level, higher levels of emotional energetic absorption, often in combination with emotional or energetic projection. And I wanted to go into this here for you. Again, there's an explainer video for that, but I really wanted to cover this here with you in context with emotional processing. It is very common, and this is important for you to understand, that you, instead of actually fully processing, fully expressing, fully communicating your feelings, your needs, and your boundaries, that you project. We all do this. You can see this in children. Infants start doing that at a very early stage, develop somewhere between, I think it's 6 weeks and 18 months. You know, this ability to project something, and it means that, you know, we sort of through our body language or through our demeanor or you know, through our behavior, okay, express what we feel or what we want instead of saying it. Okay, so when we say it, we don't need to project it. Projection is always when we sort of take it all, and there comes there's where it gets complicated, where we sort of want the other person to feel it, but perhaps we don't want them to know that this is what we want them to feel. You can tell already there comes agenda into the play, and it's a very human thing to do, okay, to project things onto others. Also, when we discover things in us that we cannot love or like about us, where we accuse the other of doing it. Yeah, can you guys relate to that? Who has projected something or accused their partner of doing something that in one way or another, it's not necessarily that you do, yes, that's yes, all of you. It's not necessarily that you do it at that moment, but it is something that you really don't like about yourself, and that's why you sort of hypercritical when the other does that, right? So in that way, other people are our mirrors here. What rubs us the wrong way, right, is usually, mirroring back to us what we cannot like, we don't like about ourselves, or what we perceive sort of as a shadow aspect of ourselves that we try to hide. And because we don't like it, or because we feel the need to pretend or to hide it, um, we then end up projecting it without being aware of it, because that's I told you guys before, these emotions are energies, and they got to go somewhere, so somehow they need to be released or they get stored. And most people, without knowing, actually, well, choose, it's an unconscious choosing to project. Okay, and this can be done in many different ways. The emotional projection is obvious. That's when we, take all our emotions and project them onto the other, and want them to feel in a certain way. Passive aggressiveness, Amanda, is one of those emotional projections. Energetic projection is a little more complex, because here we can also use mental projections, or verbal projections, or even fantasies, or sort of neediness in some sorts, creating sort of a picture in the other, like that I'm a helpless woman and I need somebody to help me, right? So we're kind of play on their patterns, okay? Or power, control, and specialness obviously is one of the most common causes for projection. We don't really want to admit it, but we do want extra attention or extra validation, or we want to be in control. And oftentimes we want to be in control because we are afraid. So it's very complex how this works in us. But when you investigate the dynamics here of energetic projection, you'll find out that we all project, but some of us project more than others. With some of us, excuse me, with some of us it's obvious. Okay, so let's say the 3-year-old that throws a tantrum, throws itself on the floor at the register of the supermarket because you're not buying the candy for him. Okay, that is an acting out and a projection. Okay, and oftentimes, if you've ever been in a situation like this or observed it, they kind of get away with it because there's lots of stress there, because other people observe us, and so that alters our behaviors, and we repress a lot. What is not so aware to most people is how their own fantasies and their own mental projections, sort of your goals and your agenda, how that actually transfers to another person energetically, and and this is then where being an empath and being energetically sensitive comes in. Your radio is always on, which means that you perceive other people's mental projections, their fantasies, their power and control and specialness, their emotional projections, their neediness, and so forth, perhaps even as your own. So there is another level of confusion here for empaths, which is why, in therapy, sort of empathy can be regarded as sort of, a mental imbalance, okay? Because if you cannot discern whether, what is being projected onto you is coming from the outside and you take it for your own. Let me use the example that Shri had earlier. If I am having an assessment with a very insecure leader or superior, then what will happen is that that person will most likely, if he or she is not trained, project their own fears and their own doubts, okay, to inferiors. This is a very common problem in work situations, okay, and this will then lead to you, obviously, because of the condition that you are the inferior. You have to suck it up. If you're an empath, if you're energetically sensitive, it might go as far as that you are not even aware of the fact that it's actually their insecurities that you are feeling, or their performance pressure, or their unexpressed emotion. So this is why for empaths and energetically sensitives, this whole subject of emotional processing is, I would say, vital. Not just instrumental, it's vital, because without all these tools and differentiations that we have to learn, you will mistake things. You will take them as your own. You will never really know, what is yours and what isn't. And that's then where most of your trauma and behavior and relationship patterns, are affected, because you are not aware of how much you project and how much other people project. And there's a very clear connection also between projection and absorption, namely, and this is until you really understand this, you have to take my say so. The more that you project, the more you will absorb. Okay, this is unfortunately something that makes it so vital and inevitable for us to really work with our own absorption and projection mechanisms. Okay, so what is an energetic absorption? That is, for example, what I just brought up here. You're talking with someone, they are in some kind of superior situation, or they're your partner, your loved one, or your child, or whatever. So there's some kind of position that you have with them, or emotional tie, and they project their stuff onto you. Okay, and as an empath, you might even, not realize that it's not even yours what you're feeling, which is a common phenomena amongst untrained empaths. But even if you do, you'll still have things that put you into this emotional processing trap, because you want to fix, you want to heal them, you want to help them, or your value system is like, you want to compensate. It's okay, he just said this because, or something like this, or you're trying to convince the person, or you're sympathizing with their victimhood, or you see this here in this graph. It looks a bit confusing, but it is that confusing, really, because it is really hard to identify until we become aware of these mechanics. And then you see all the different ways. There's like probably 50 more ways of how we project and how we absorb energies, and especially emotions, from others. Denise is asking if there is a correlation between trauma and projection. So the more trauma a person has, is there a correlation? Does this person project more? Yes. Yes, exactly. The more unprocessed emotions, the more projection. That is a clear yes. You will not find that in any psychological literature, because in psychology, the process of emotional projection is being seen in a more sort of simplistic way. From an energetic point of view, if we put the energetic component into this, especially, and this is the unseen aspects of interaction between humans, is a huge unresearched field. It requires people who are able to qualify this, right? It requires people that are trained in energy work. I can clearly see this, how these things work in people. And I can tell, I can give you a clear yes here, that my observation is that the more trauma, the higher the degree of projection and absorption. But also, this has to do with the agenda. Don't forget that. As an example here, narcissistic behavioral patterns, which work primarily based on energetic projection and emotional projection. Any kind of mind control and gaslighting, psyops, and so forth, all uses energetic, mental, and emotional projection. Okay, it also depends on the agenda. So some people are aware of it. Okay, some people do this on purpose. And this is then where we need to know what our weak spots are here, because as empaths, you know, if we don't know our own empathy and our own emotional processing, then we are like just like sitting ducks, really. Okay, we can be played like an instrument because you know, due to our empathy, we will always try to absorb it, and that then, you know, if that's cultivated, if this is also something that we are like being groomed to do, being conditioned to do from childhood on, is a reason why we see so many narcissist empaths, toxic relationship patterns. But I do want to point out that this is a normal human uh, behavior, and that this is much more common than you think it is. You becoming aware of these energetic projection and absorption mechanisms in yourself is, you know, the best way to learn how to protect yourself, and also how to better deal with these things, how to better cope. So here, just real quick, for the comprehensiveness, emotional coping is the result of high levels of inner conflict and diminished levels of emotional literacy. So it's basically, you know, the problem here, the confliction, while sometimes needed to deal with elevated levels of stress over time, it replaces, at some point, it replaces the ability to self-regulate. So in other words, you no longer become able to self-regulate, integrate and resolve emotions with yourself and others, often expressing as projection, which leads to high levels of absorption. Okay, this is sort of a bit clinical way of describing what most of you guys actually experience as a problem in your life. Okay, that can be magnified through energetic sensitivity and being empathetic. So how can we then, you know, sort of recognize what our emotional coping looks like? You know, qualify this. All right. So there's a first of all, you know, by becoming aware of if we're even able to control our emotions, the way we emote. You know, people that cannot control their emotions, they just vent, and there's absolutely zero regulation. Okay, then the second one is seeking relief or seeking pleasure. You know, just wanting to feel good, gratification. This is where we can see the dopamine trap here, where people go into all kinds of activities, you know, addictive behaviors typically, you know, that create sort of this instant gratification feeling, like an instant release of dopamine and serotonin. The third one is active distraction. So that would be similar to that, but it has a slightly different nature. This agitation, this hyperactivity, always seeking, always doing, but never actually really processing anything, just being super hectic, super busy all the time. Often also a very high latency, very high receptivity for drama, and especially other people's dramas. That's active distraction. Emotion seeking, questioning, you know, turning every stone, what's wrong with me, also then accompanied often with sort of negative inner self-talk, and, you know, constantly wondering what this means, assuming, you know, this false perception that we talked about can be a consequence of, you know, low levels, you know, of healthy emotional coping. Palliative coping is a medical clinical word here, means to only focus on symptoms, only want to have the symptoms go away. Avoidance, you know, distancing, numbing, running away, hiding, protecting, pretending. Okay. Addiction and addictive behavior is a big cluster here. So that's why, you know, underneath all addictions is a lack of emotional processing, which leads to, you know, sort of unhealthy emotional coping. So the addiction itself then is the coping. And you know this here, Sacred Self-Healing members, because we regard the totality of our ego states and behaviors as an addiction, really. So for us, really, all coping is an addiction. fantasizing, escaping, the waterfalls and unicorns, sort of projecting yourself into some kind of alternative reality. And then, of course, the projection directly onto somebody or the world, which would be, similar to externalizing, or the absorbing, which is, the similar to the process of internalizing everything, taking everything personal. All right. Just as an overview here, there's an exercise that I would like to do with you real quick here, and that has to do with these overwhelming emotions that we've talked about already. And instead of just becoming aware of what can actually get you into these high levels of stress, okay, I want to investigate with you typical patterns of coping, like your coping cycle, or at least how it was in the past. So pick one overwhelming emotion, or a situation where you have like really strong sort of either emotional flashback or some kind of really strong emotional stress, and then describe to us. And this would be important that you describe this into the microphone, because here the way you express it, and also the effort of wanting to express it already helps you in healing it, because it then sort of recreates or creates new neural pathways for you to actually process it. So learning to describe what you observe and your cycles and your patterns of behavior is part of emotional processing. So who would like to go through this here? Yeah, no judgment, obviously. Hey, Denise. Really just like applying our awareness. What are some of these emotional, overwhelming things that you've observed and your coping patterns in the past?
Anxiety. I feel like anxiety was the biggest one for a long time.
Okay.
And yeah.
So anxiety is not really an emotion. Okay, it is already a behavior. It's already the consequence of an emotion. What is the emotion underneath anxiety?
Fear.
Okay. Yes. Here, I'm just being sort of a bit of a stickler here, because I'm trying to train you guys in this, right? Okay. So when you experience fear, can you give a bit more sort of vocabulary with this here? How we practiced this last time? What kind of fear? What kind of anxiety? What is social anxiety, or give us a little more info here, or yourself?
Yeah, social anxiety, feeling worry, feeling unsafe in my body, and also in what I'm doing, like where I'm at.
So in conjunction with others. Social anxiety
Yeah,
means that you've observed a certain pattern of behavior in conjunction with others, and the underlying emotion is fear. So there's a fear there.
mm-hmm.
And you just said that you cannot feel safe.
Yeah.
In yourself. Can you say it again? And I just want to get you guys used to the structure so that it becomes easier for you to express these things.
Yeah, not feeling safe in my own skin.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what are some of the patterns, the behavior, the coping patterns that you've observed with yourself?
Well, I will smoke a lot, smoke cigarettes back then, and I will go into distraction to not. I avoided or did distancing, and what always helped was like just having some nature time.
Okay, that's already your way of self-healing then, but how you used to do it in the past. Okay,
I will
whenever
smoke and distract myself if it was movies, or I will eat, like be eating, and I resort to substances that will help with that, like, yeah. So like
food included, right? That's a substance too. That's the dopamine and the serotonin sometimes. So then here, describe typical consequences. So what would be the consequences of that in the past? You know,
Um,
like how did that work for you? How did it
no, it didn't
go?
work. It didn't work. No, it didn't work. I really had no solution. It was like a constant cycle, you know, like that will go on sometimes for months, you know. Um, and I'll be just chain smoking, trying like I will be feeling very obsessive, you know, like trying to find solutions or trying to avoid, like almost controlling in a way.
Where, like mentally, like thinking about it, obsessively
Yeah.
thinking about things. Okay, so yeah, that's part of. So, would it relieve you of that emotional stress, that inner confliction? Actually, I mean, would it actually help?
Oh no, no.
Okay, so
It's
you
just
just found yourself in that looping place, you know,
yeah,
where you just excessively trying to either through substances or avoiding or sinking, yeah,
yeah,
to get
yeah,
by.
yeah.
And how long would that normally take? I mean, in the past, from what you've observed, so sort of as your patterns throughout your life.
I mean, it could be a day, but it could go for months at the time. It did,
A
like
good,
there were times, yeah, it could go for months at the time. Like there were times in my life where it was so chronic, it was just months, like
I was,
clusters.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
just gonna say, I mean, if the conditions that we're in and it constantly trigger our social anxiety, then it can be an ongoing thing, right? It never stops. It just like and leads to all kinds of other problems. What are some of the problems that you've noticed with that? You know
Well,
that
I don't know if it's a problem, but like weight, you know, like gaining weight, sort of like I guess to protect
okay.
myself, create more space, right?
Hmm.
Unconsciously. Um, and that was very uncomfortable. And just basically not, I mean, there was there was no solution. It was just a loop. So the
Yeah.
anxiety just kept increasing and the coping kept increasing. And yeah,
Then comes the
yes.
self beat up, right? Oh, why did I do this? Why am I smoking so much? Or why am I eating so much? Look at you, you're gaining weight. Now
Yeah.
you feel ugly, short and fat,
No, yeah.
right? And it's even worse now, you know, right? I mean, now you see this all confirmed, right? That life is hard and so forth. So that's the pattern, okay,
Yeah.
or used to be the pattern. Now, Denise, I know for a fact that you're very active here in our sacred self-healing community, that you have worked a lot on this. So to here discuss how to change from coping to self-regulation or self-regulating. So there's coping and self-regulating. Those are the two different ways of how we can handle our emotional stress, right? And coping is not processing, basically. Okay, that's just looping. Okay, and self-regulating means that we are starting to experience ways how we can control this better, not control as in make it go away, but as in like not falling for the old pattern. What are some of the things that you found out, Denise, that have helped you to
Uh,
regulate more rather than cope?
Nature helps a lot. Every time I
Nature
do
what? Like what
mhm,
exact, what in the practical, like
yeah,
being
practical,
walking?
like yeah, walking in nature, sitting, even just sitting and watching the sunset or watching the stars.
Okay.
Um, Drinking water helps a lot, and resetting, like doing a detox, even if it's just a mild one, resetting that always helps. And swimming. I mean,
Okay.
everything. Yeah,
So water
swimming.
for you. You notice that water in not just drinking water, but also being in water helps you?
Yeah, yeah, like a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah, very
Like
cool.
everything is gone. You know, wow. You know, like
Well,
yeah.
okay, but then next time you come, you in the same situation, it starts over again. So did that help you to just release and process better, or did it also change your anxiety altogether?
It helped me process it and just deal with what needs to be deal. It's almost like a reset.
So you feel that you can better deal with it, that you have a little better control over it, not like a victim of your own anxiety. You feel you know
Yeah,
what you can do, you know,
yeah,
and how to help yourself. Cool.
yeah, because it helps me connect with my
Hmm.
body, and so yeah, and
That's
yoga
always
helps too.
Yeah, let's all
yoga
take a
help.
mental note here. Connecting with the body is essential. I'll summarize this all for you here because this is something many of us forget when it comes to emotional processing and mental processing. You know, we forget that we have a body, and that body stores a lot. And often, you know, just like helping our body to release things in form of simple exercise, aerobics or yoga or something can already help to release these stored emotions, these stored energies. Thank you, Denise, for sharing.
Thank
Does
you.
anybody have a different example that you would like to share? Different coping mechanism, different cycles, different
I can,
consequences? Yeah, Sri, go
um,
ahead.
I mean, going with the negative feedback one itself, I think in a different context though, I mean, I feel for me it's been like it gets depressing. Like I go into this
Okay.
state of depression.
Okay, so here again, uh, you are describing the symptom first, just like Denise. Denise said anxiety, you say depression. Okay, what is the feeling, the emotion underneath depression?
You know, it's kind of similar in the sense I felt uncomfortable in my skin. I felt a lot of grief and pain, like my chest was hurting. Um, I'm trying to figure out what the emotion could possibly be.
Well,
Um,
grief is an emotion, you know.
right?
I mean, grieving, you know, and the chest pain that you describe is a very typical physical symptom, right?
Yeah,
Think along the lines like grieving, maybe with how it actually feels, the feeling underneath it. I
it's
talked a little
hurt.
bit over it. Yes, last time. Sorry.
It's just feeling hurt. You know, like
Hmm.
intense disappointment um,
Disappointment.
and there's also anger. Like you know, I actually
Mhm.
felt in my recent cycle that I could literally see the cycle. I went from this depression. I almost felt suicidal, which was
Mhm.
unnecessary now that I think of it. But um, and then goes into anger, and then going into specialness, and then going from there. I could literally see it, like negotiating,
Mhm.
and then and you know, self-deprecating, and then you know, for me though, I think the coping in the past has typically been um, you know, I would call my sister or call somebody seeking assurance, you know,
Okay.
inconsolably sometimes, you know, and like you were describing earlier, you know, thinking of all possibilities and what if this happens, what if that happens, and you know,
Mhm.
um, I feel I know I'm doing much less of that for sure. Um,
Let me just
and
quickly summarize here, not to disrupt the flow, but just so you get some time also to take a breather, right? Because it's hard to talk about these things. If it was so easy, right, then we wouldn't really have the need to cope. So, not that coping is always bad, you know, but the reason why I want to do this exercise with you guys is for us to become more aware of qualifying our own coping, you know, if this is a healthy coping or not so healthy. So you find yourself in places where you experience a lot of pain, accompanied with the forms of grieving, a heaviness, an emotional heaviness, really, right? That
this
can go
powerlessness, yeah.
and powerlessness. Okay, very good. And that makes you feel sort of like you know the experience sort of a state of depression, and then your coping with it would be sort of very complex. You've observed the cycles really well, Shri. You know, anything from like, you know, even lower, you know, oh, what's the point? You know, might as well kill myself, to like, oh, they're so mean, you know, and I don't deserve this and stuff like that, right? But like where it turns into anger or projection, right?
Mhm.
And then comes the judgment or the pride or the specialness, you called it, you know,
Yeah.
said, oh, you know, often also in conjunction with comparing with others, and feeling really sort of feeling justified in being unfairly or unjustly treated, right? And then comes sort of the self defeat, the self degradation, where we judge ourselves again, and where it all starts over again, where we feel the pain again. And that's something that you've already beautifully observed. And then sort of in the practical, you felt the need to self-soothe in some ways through getting reassurance from someone you trust, I suppose, your sister. Does that work? Did it work in the past?
You know, the thing is, it's gone into its own pattern
Yeah,
where
okay. Well, yeah, okay.
her own issues. And, I think at some point I've got to kind of, realize that what's the stopping point,
So
with
here,
the,
what I hear you say is that maybe sometimes, but then there's also the dynamics between you and your sister, perhaps
yeah,
even projection and absorption
exactly.
that you're not even aware of, or she's not aware of, and that it doesn't work that well. That it just leads to sort of ever repeating. It's never concluded. There never is really an end to it. It just sort of has different phases, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what are some of the things that you have discovered here as things that can help you to self-regulate a little better?
It's been interesting because I decided to bawl my eyes out for a few hours,
Oh,
and then um, I actually did go out for a walk. I know that I was in a low place, but then just being around, this was actually something I noticed more clearly recently, just being around people who are not where I am. So there were just,
cool.
people smiling and walking around and kids running around. Just being in that environment it kind of took me out of my head. It took me out of my mind.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, we don't even need to interact with these people, right? It can be
yeah,
random people, strangers.
yeah,
It's osmotic somehow. When we surround ourselves with with happy people, we are more likely to feel at least sort of a little better about ourselves. When we surround ourselves with other depressed people, well, you guys can finish the sentence in your heads. It'll just sort of regurgitate the whole thing, right? And it will make it worse. Yeah, so that's a very good, very cool insight here that you came up with. Is that just exposing yourself to a different mood or a different crowd or a different community, or just even just random people that are not in that state, but that can already help. That's cool. What
yeah.
else? Or is there
I mean,
more?
yeah, I mean, food as well, just trying to, I think that's the other thing that happened as a consequence. I was kind of draining myself. It's just, drinking water, eating food. I ate some fresh pineapple, which somehow felt very good. Um,
So
so
as opposed to not eating. So for you, the cycle was different than Denise. For you, it was sort of depriving yourself of food,
yeah,
perhaps, or depriving yourself of pleasure.
yes,
That's interesting and very good here for the audience to see how this can express in different ways. Not everybody starts eating when they're emotionally stuck. Some people stop eating. I'm a stop eater too. And other people eat more. Second chakra, that's our relationship to food. So you and I belong to that category as well, Sri, begin to deprive ourselves.
yeah,
Yeah, cool. And so you notice that if you just eat something, maybe something fresh, something loving, for you that you like, that can also already help
yeah.
to elevate your mood. Yeah, that's cool. Any other things that you found out so far? I mean, it's an ongoing process, right? We get better and better at it. That's really important to
Yeah,
understand. Really, it's not a process. It's a processing, an
yeah.
ongoing process.
Water definitely as well. Just taking a shower was kind of helpful.
Mhm.
And
We talk a lot about these things here in this community, you know, what these practical things are that we can do to lift our energy, to lift our vibes, to lift our mood, you know, and to increase connection. So whenever we talk in an energetic sense about increasing connection, then really that's what we're talking about, you know, creating better conditions to actually process things and not just absorb them, suck them up, or avoid them. Yeah. So this is the connection here also that you can see, right? Emotion is one thing, and the mood and the behavior patterns, but there's also something energetic with that, you know, where it's not necessarily about talking about the emotion or writing it down or something. Sometimes it's also just something energetic that comes with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Sri, for
Thank you.
sharing, and again here for, you know, in this setting here to be vulnerable. Just here for the comprehensiveness, emotional regulation requires us to be in touch with our emotions, needs, and wants. And it then leads to like paying loving attention and allowing ourselves to feel our emotions, as it helps us to understand the signals that they inform us about, which develops the skill to better deal with and self-regulate overwhelming emotions. High levels of emotional regulation alleviate stress, reduces the need to cope, and makes us more confident. Okay, so this is just sort of textbook stuff here for you guys. You already kind of worked this out. Okay, so here are some of the hallmarks of emotional regulation. You know, spending loving inner attention to, you know, what is going on and what we need. It leads to better understanding of our inner experience. The ability to name it. So name it to tame it, you know, helps to release and prevent secondary stress symptoms. Knowing what we're feeling allows us to better express and respond to our own emotions. So emotional clarity helps to communicate inner feelings with self and others. So that's where the emotional vocabulary, the literacy comes in. Actively improving on handling our stressful emotional states helps us to develop more trust in self. Impulse control through slowing down, sharing, or taking a break. We've heard a few examples here, you know, can increase our ability to feel confident. Acceptance helps us to reduce the need to block or cope with our emotions. It allows us to develop strategies to better deal with these overwhelming emotions in the future. And in self-coaching, this is the mental component that we haven't really addressed yet. Self-coaching helps us to remember that we can survive our own emotions in moments of stress. You know, this then leads to higher levels of acceptance. You know, we just say to ourselves, okay, this is a stressful situation. You know, sometimes it literally helps to just say to yourself, it sucks. Yeah. And it's important to recognize that instead of trying to really lie to yourself that you have to perform. You know, when you're going through certain situations, you know, you might need extra time or extra space. So let's just come to the core element here that shows us then ultimately how we can really systematically work this with ourselves. Again here, words, terminology, just to help you also investigate this further, do your own research, verify all this for yourself. What we then call emotional intelligence. This is sort of the mishmash of all of them. Emotional intelligence is the result of higher levels of emotional literacy and the ability to self-regulate, integrate, and resolve emotions within oneself and with others. And I added quickly before we started, without projecting and absorbing. So what are the pillars of emotional intelligence, guys? And Amanda, you will find a lot of answers here. A quick question here. Yeah, so the pillars of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So you see, we're entering sort of more complex dimensions of this now. Let's just go through this real quick, okay? You can all hopefully feel what this relates to, because we have had some really good examples already. Self-awareness, most of what we've talked about has to do with self-awareness, and that's why I said to you, Amanda, earlier, it starts with self-awareness. It always has to start with us. You know your story. You've made peace with your past. You know your emotions and your beliefs, and you know your behavior patterns. So these 3 hours that we've worked through things here together should enable you to do this. Can you put a check here? Do you feel like you have, even though you might feel the need to practice this with yourself, but do you feel like you have sort of a greater sense of self-awareness here in regards to describing things, investigating your own patterns, observing yourself, witnessing yourself? Okay, wonderful. The second pillar is self-management. Well, this is obviously something we all work on, and the same with self-awareness. It's an ongoing process, right? You have developed self-calming disciplines, breathing, meditating, mindfulness. Many of you have confirmed this, that you've intuitively or consciously been already drawn to these kind of self-soothing, self-calming disciplines. You learn self-affirmative and positive inner self-talk. And now this is something that we need to cultivate with ourselves. Here is where the other workshops that we've done on counteracting our critical inner voice, being more conscientious about our level of communication, the inner negativity and so forth. I mean, literally all transmissions and workshops we do have to do with that. Develop a healthier coping. Okay, so we all have certain coping mechanisms that we rely on, and they basically, as sort of a whole entire cluster, then kind of define our ego identity. And to change those, guys, really just means that you need to look at your coping from the standpoint of health. Is this healthy coping or is this unhealthy coping? Because if it's unhealthy coping, it never actually leads to resolve, and it actually makes things worse. And then what we can do is moderation, or gradually developing healthier coping mechanisms. So instead of, for example, repressing anger, we talked about this last time, understanding that some, like say physical exercise can help to relieve anger, or release anger a little bit, so that we can better deal with what was it actually that made me angry, instead of judging my anger and feeling bad that we're feeling angry. Was there maybe something like a violation of my boundaries or injustice or something in it? But the release of this initial emotional overwhelm, it can often bring more clarity. That's then, this emotional clarity that I mentioned earlier, where you can actually recognize what makes you angry, because it's a signal. Any emotion is just a signal. Then develop self-motivation. That's a big hallmark, or a big trait of self-management, is to do these things out of a self-motivated desire, to improve your own handling, emotional, physical, mental, mind, body, spirit. Okay. And you develop self-care routines and maintain good physical health. These things all belong into the category of self-management. They cannot be separated from another. And it's probably something where most of you are currently working on. I still work on many of these components, and there's different phases in life where, we maybe prioritize different aspects of this. Say we will work on learning how to meditate and breathing and yoga and something like this, but we're not really spending that much time, say, with physical stuff, or we were more physical in a phase, and or we're really working on our communication for some time. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's normal to prioritize one thing, because it's easier for us to feel that we're progressing if we take one thing and work with this a little bit. But ultimately, then we want to merge all this together. Social awareness. Now, this is then when it gets complicated, because here's where we also enter all the nonverbal stuff and, the signaling between people, and of course also the big subject of manipulation and so forth, agenda. So first of all, we should really see it in that order. Also, we need to understand nonverbal communication, our own and others. And this really starts with observing yourself, how you move, how you express your, not just how you say things, but also your body language, how that your face, if you actually have a smiling face or if you have a frowning face. Those things are really essential in understanding and better interpreting other people's reactions to us. Okay, I said earlier that 80% of our conclusions in regards to social awareness are probably false. Okay, that's provided we've never actually worked with this. Know the difference between constructive and destructive communication. And again, here, this is a big field. I mean, you can spend years, on improving your connection and communication, and that will never really stop. Understand basic emotional needs. That's something that can be done quite easily, and I would also recommend here to increase your vocabulary, to really become aware of the hierarchy of your needs, because there are some needs that we have, say, for instance, spiritual stuff. When your physical needs are not met, the spiritual needs, they cannot really grip. Okay, this is why so many people, when they're unhappy in their lives, try to, they compartmentalize, and then they try to progress in one area only, but they disregard the fundamentals. Okay, if I have no money, okay, it's very difficult to really understand the basic mechanics of manifestation, or not to be affected by them emotionally, because if I don't have money to pay for my rent or my food, okay, then we can't just meditate that away. Okay, that we need to act there. There's a 3D need. Okay, so not just emotional needs, but also the 3D needs. Develop a positive and balanced view of others. Oftentimes when we get stuck in our cycles, we develop sort of this demonized or vilified a way of looking at other, hostile, a hostile view on the world, on other people. I was very glad to hear you, Shri, shared this, that you've made the experience that when you just change the scenery and surround yourself with other people that are not depressed, that actually already helps you a little bit, even if there's not much interaction. Understand your emotional games and manipulation, your own. Okay, understand, your repressed aggressiveness, your repressed stuff, your passive stuff, your projections. Yeah, if we want to change our relationships, we need to start with ourselves first. We need to make sure that we keep our side of the fence clean, guys. That is from a 3D point of view as well as an energetic point of view, rule number one. Okay, this most of these things that we're talking about here also play into the energetic reality of things and affect such things as etheric projection, etheric protection. Because if we energetically project a lot, we're opening, these energetic channels to different energetic dimensions and invite this in. And this is something that many people kind of never really get to, but it's at some level of your training becomes really integral. And that is to know what your integrity is, to know your essence, to know what you stand for, to know who you are. Okay, that is part of your social awareness. And this is what most of us, are still really, working on in the core. So, don't expect all your relationships and your jobs and your interactions with other people to be perfect. They can't be perfect if, you don't even know what your coping and your dysregulation is. Okay, it's not going to stop there, and you shouldn't use that as a coping cycle either, and just sort of over process, you know, yourself and trying to become perfect. It's not about that. It's about this constant improvement and accepting that life changes, world changes, everything, people change, you know, and just be okay with that. So the last pillar of our emotional intelligence here is the relationship management, and that comes after the other three, okay? And that is to develop positive, reflective listening skills. If you can do this with yourself, you can do this with others. If you can't do this with others, you can't do this with yourself. Develop assertive yet constructive communication and exchange. Again, if you have negative inner communication, you're going to have a negative outer communication. And there is a sort of limited exchange here. So whether or not you perceive a relationship as mutual or conducive, you know, will so much depend on your inner state and your inner self-awareness, regulation capabilities, and you know, your ability to know, you know, when something is constructive and when it's not. Learn to resort to conflict resolution skills, you know, to be focused on higher vibrational outcomes. Know when it makes no sense to try to fight over something, you know, pick your battles. Understand that when you're in a certain state, that it, you know, in a certain low state, it makes no sense of trying to discuss something forever, because you know, you're not actually working towards resolution. You're working towards a confirmation of your own misery. Okay, these are the kind of things that a lot of people mistake sort of as talking about things. It's often not talking about things. It's often just like throwing things at another, and that's why the communication is often not very good quality. So that's why we have all these misunderstandings, assumptions, and premature conclusions, which are 80% of them are false. Learn skills to inform and support others. That's then really when, you know, when it comes to, like, say, being a leader, what I said earlier, you know, how most leaders aren't trained. You know, leaders who are trained in this, you know, they then naturally develop this attitude, sort of more of a mentoring and supporting attitude towards other people. And then provide enough freedom for mutual exchange and synergy. You know, create the space. If you just so wrapped up with yourself and your own, you know, insufficient emotional processing, there's not much space for conducive relationships, guys. You know, it's just a reality of things. All right. So we need to wrap this up here. I just wanted to tell you guys here that your empathy has a lot to do with it. And this is not a mental disease. It is a wonderful opportunity for you to increase your ability to relate to your emotions and those of others. And with it, it gives you an opportunity to become a very processed person, and perhaps even to become a leader. All right, it is an opportunity, it's an invitation. So your energetic sensitivity, your empathy is an invitation. Our whole society develops in that direction, but it requires you to have good levels of self-compassion, which is, you know, which is what increases our ability to relate to ourselves and others. So without self-compassion, you will be unable to do this for others. It's very important to understand. And I have a self-assessment test in regards to self-compassion here at the very end for you. Energy management, we won't have the time to go into this. We don't really need to cover this here, because we have implied this in everything that we have talked about, namely that emotions are simply a form of energy, that each emotion is a slightly different form and therefore needs to be understood and processed differently. And because emotions are energy, they need to be moved. The human system is a channel for these energies, for the energy of emotion, much like a riverbed that acts as a channel for water. So we need to allow it to flow through us. That's why it's so important that we find ways to release it and not to sort of constipate it. Energy awareness then can help us to better understand and address these emotional states, so that you can, you know, do something about it before the emotion can control you. So here to summarize, what your energy awareness then, as sort of an additional dimension of self-awareness, can do for you. Become aware of the signal that your system sends you. See all your emotions, sensations, and even thoughts, interpretations as signals. Slow down, feel into your energy and your coping. Take note of your unmet needs. Guys, in 99% of the cases, that it's because we have an unmet need. Ask yourself what you truly need and what you truly want right now. Make the first step towards balancing your energy in the now, in the present moment, through your present moment awareness. And prioritize inner balance before trying to cope or fix or avoid or distancing yourself. That's really what this comes down to. And here, that you will not have to understand all this very complex. I'm showing the differences in energetic processing and emotional processing. And I want you to just remember these two things here, apart from some of the other phrases that you've learned. You have about 1 to 1.5 seconds before a thought gets stuck in you. 1 to 1.5 seconds before you begin to judge what is experiencing. And you have no more than 6 seconds to choose the emotional state you want to get stuck in. I know it sounds kind of sarcastic, but remember this. Okay, your mind will kick in after like about 1 second of you experiencing something, and it will start to interpret it. Okay, and then after 6 seconds, you will get stuck in the emotional state. People where there's a lot of trauma present and PTSD will go directly into the emotional state without the thought. And then the thought comes later, but the thought then interprets, the stuck emotional state already, so it's no longer true. That in and of itself could be a workshop, for us to investigate this a little bit. I just want to say here as closing words, this self-healing increases your capacity to process and manage your energy and with it your emotions, your thoughts, and your physical well-being. And for those of you who want to do a self-compassion, self-assessment test, there's this online test here at selfcompassion.org. Test how self-compassionate you are. It's very relieving about, or revealing about some of, the things how we treat ourselves. So yes, emotional processing leads to the inner experience of higher consciousness within you, and with it, in spiritual intelligence, which requires emotional intelligence. That is sort of the part here that most of the New Age esotericism it does not really regard. Emotional processing is needed just as much as physical health, physical self-care to reach, higher levels of spiritual intelligence. So as long as I'm alive, I am processing. Being alive means processing, means improving, constant, and over again. So this is hopefully here, I know this was a lot of material, extremely complex, and impossible really to do, without lecturing. And then if we want to do sharing, obviously, then it takes a lot of time. This could be like a 2-semester training at college, really. So I'm just really giving you sort of the essence of all these things and keywords, terminology that you can research for yourself, that you can investigate and verify for yourself. Obviously, here within our self-healing community, we discuss these things, illuminate them from all different perspectives. The sacred self-healing steps are a wonderful tool for this. and we constantly work on it. So it is not sort of anything that we could regard as a ladder or achievement. It's really just our ability to, not get stuck in our experience and not just observe what we experience, but really appreciate witnessing what we are experiencing and then processing it and experimenting, exploring new ways, healthier ways, more fulfilling ways, more abundant ways, more loving ways. Thank you, guys. It's been wonderful. Please comment. Please give me inspirations in regards to perhaps aspects that we covered here, just sort of zooming through, that you would like to cover in a future workshop, by zooming deeper into it, and which parts especially were helpful for you here. This would greatly help me in developing programs for the future. Okay, so I'll send the recording out to you, and then a link for an email that you can give me. You can give me suggestions. Also, of course, it will be posted in the forum, in the Sacred Self-Healing Community Forum. So you're always welcome to post there as well. Thank you so much. Wonderful. I think you did a fantastic job, and particularly big thanks to those of you who shared here into the microphone, who were vulnerable, and thank you. This really helps others. Okay. Yes. Bye-bye.